Welcome back to Blumira Briefings, your weekly download of the top headlines and trends for your security practice. This week, Microsoft dropped a record-breaking super-de-duper Patch Tuesday with 167 fixes, including some vulnerabilities that we've already seen exploited in the wild. Prompt injection attacks are tricking Copilot and Agentforce into going rogue, and malicious Chrome extensions are stealing session cookies to totally bypass MFA. A quick note on one story that you aren't seeing in this week's briefing, because you've probably been hearing about it nonstop all week: Mythos. There's always a lot of noise in the security world, and we do have a tendency to overfocus on the shiniest and the newest things. And look, I'm not going to say that stuff doesn't matter. This is absolutely going to have an impact on offensive security, and we're going to keep talking about it. But if your organization sees an incident this week or next week or probably this month, it is overwhelmingly more likely to come from an unpatched SharePoint server or a poisoned browser extension or a broadly accessible AI tool doing something that it wasn't supposed to, as opposed to a brand new model. Good security is mostly keeping up with the boring but important stuff. And since we're here to help avoid you getting popped, that's what I'm going to cover right now. So, Patch Tuesday for April landed this week, and the headline is a SharePoint server 0-day that's actively already under exploitation. It's an authentication bypass that lets an unauthenticated attacker spoof their way in over the network. If you're running on-prem SharePoint, consider this must-see CVE. Attackers don't need credentials, they don't need user interaction, and it's already being used. So Jake, what does the emergency patching workflow actually look like for teams that are running SharePoint in production? And what should they be watching for if they can't patch immediately?
Hey everybody, this week we've got Microsoft SharePoint servers sharing a little bit too much information with people they probably shouldn't be, but luckily Microsoft has our back and they've got a patch ready and waiting. So here's some immediate steps you can take if you're going through it in your environment. First things first is don't panic, take a deep breath. This is a 6.5 CVSS scored vulnerability, so it puts it right at about the medium level, but unfortunately we do know that it's a known exploited vulnerability, which does up the spice of things a little bit here, so just keep that in mind. But ultimately I think the impact of this and the actual scope is pretty limited. Most people are not going to be affected by this, but it never hurts to take a deep breath and take a step back and then get into things. Next thing to understand is, are you even affected? Like I said, the scope on this is pretty limited, and it's limited to on-prem SharePoint servers only, and specific to that it's 2016, 2019 or subscription edition. So anybody running M365 SharePoint online, that you guys are not affected. Another thing to consider is, if you are running one of these vulnerable on-prem versions, what's the internet access look like to it? Can anyone from outside access it, or is it limited to just a very narrow scope? That also gives you an understanding of like how risky this is for your environment. If it's super narrow and only very few networks can actually connect to it, then that reduces your risk quite a bit. But if anybody on the internet can access it, then that's the risk is a little elevated there. Next thing to consider is, if you are affected, still don't panic. Like we said in the beginning, the patch is available, and just figure out your patch plan. It is only a 6.5, but it's on the Kev list, so it is probably something you'd want to get to sooner rather than later. But in my mind, and again, this is just my own opinion, this is probably like an after hours thing or even a weekend patch. There's also cases where you just can't patch, and if that's the case for you, just consider and review different network controls that you might be able to put in place to mitigate this. Like we were saying in the beginning, if you can make it narrow scope to who can actually access those vulnerable on-prem servers from the internet, that does a lot to reduce your risk. So limit it to specific users, specific network ranges. If you have something like a web access firewall in place to put up in front of that, or do any kind of other policies there to prevent access, that would go a long way as well. Anything to help reduce or mitigate the public internet access to this on-prem SharePoint server is going to go a long way if you can't get those patches installed right away. Last thing you can consider doing is auditing your SharePoint logs for any unusual authentication patterns. Spoofing attacks usually show up as anomalous session activity, so that's something you can look for. But again, the details on this vulnerability aren't super concrete, and they're kind of hush-hush on everything. So it's hard to tell exactly what you're going to see in the logs and what's going to be unusual, but it doesn't hurt to do a quick audit every once in a while. You might be able to find something in there you weren't expecting, and that's just in case you can't get that patch installed. That's just, maybe you want to audit these until you can get that patch installed. It's just something to consider, but don't go down the rabbit hole and spin your wheels like looking through logs for hours and hours. Just do a quick cursory cursory glance, you might find something in there that's worth investigating. So yeah, just follow these steps and you should be in good shape to keep your SharePoint servers from being a little too chatty with unusual or unexpected visitors.
So that's the infrastructure side. And now it's time for our apparently weekly segment on hijacking overtrusted AI tools. Researchers demonstrated that both Microsoft Copilot and Salesforce Agentforce are vulnerable to indirect prompt injection attacks. The attack is pretty simple. You embed hidden instructions inside an email, a web form, or a shared document. The AI processes it, sees what it thinks is a legitimate command, and executes it using that employee's own permissions. The whole attack is a single sentence that humans easily overlook and AI usually can't ignore. It runs with whatever access that user already has. This one is a proof of concept right now and not yet confirmed in the wild, but the technique is pretty trivial to replicate, and the implications for anyone who's using AI to do things like summarize emails can be pretty serious. Not to mention, last year, we saw the first zero-click prompt injection attack that also used email and also targeted Copilot. So Mike, what else can we advise folks to do if they're worried about attacks that are targeting the LLMs that their users are increasingly using?
All right, so this is some research out of Capsule Security. This is basically a input confusion vulnerability. They were able to find two of them, one in SharePoint forms and the other one in Salesforce, and then like hosted forms. So effectively what this is, it's a prompt injection, but it's like stored later. So imagine somebody fills out a contact form and their name has a prompt in it, right? That goes into your CRM or wherever your database. And then later on, you run an AI job across it to say, like, look through all the names and sort whatever, right? Like whatever you want to do. And then later on, that will basically treat that data as sanitized, and you never sanitized it on the input. And then it'll trigger whatever the prompt was that somebody put in their CRM. So, not great. Both of them have fixed it at this point for their hosted versions. It's very similar to, if you're familiar with a stored SQL injection, right? Like you get a SQL statement somewhere in a database, and then later on something triggers it and it runs an SQL command. So we have the same thing with AI. It's all very like early 2000s web and people forgetting to sanitize input. But now the way it works is, input comes from anywhere. And when you run an AI model on any data, you have to assume that it's safe, basically, or do the work to sanitize the data yourself, right? So just remember that, like, any data is user data. If you're getting it from a user, doesn't have to be like a login screen on your website, doesn't have to be a contact form. It can be anything. And the stored prompt injection is just going to be a thing for a long time until we figure out how to sanitize this stuff up front. So try to do your best, sanitize your data wherever you're getting it from. Doesn't have to be a form. Let me reiterate this. It could be like a CSV you're getting from your customers or some API you're calling. This data can come from anywhere as long as you store it and then you run LLMs over it after the fact without doing any sanitization. Like, you are going to be susceptible to these kind of attacks.
Finally, from AI manipulation to something that feels almost quaintly old school by now, but unfortunately stays just as effective. Threat actors are pushing malicious Chrome extensions disguised as legitimate tools, and they're actively harvesting Google and Telegram session cookies and credentials. With a session cookie, MFA's totally bypassed, so that doesn't really mitigate the risk. This is the kind of attack where the user thinks that they're installing an ad blocker, and actually they just gave somebody the keys to their Google Workspace account. So Ian, what's the practical defense here, especially for orgs that don't yet have tighter control over the extensions that their users are installing?
So these Chrome extensions that we're seeing now that are exfiltrating data or user information is a continued trend of applications or software or just different connections being established that have a lot more permissions than they need to have out of the gate. This tracks with something that Blumira sees on a pretty regular basis. One of our highest detections or alerts that we see fire off across our customer base is when a user connects a 365 connected application to their tenant that allows a lot more permissions than it needs to do. When you allow any user or any service to be connected to your 365 tenant, you're opening up a lot of risk to then have a variety of different places, different organizations connected to that tenant and possibly use the data in malicious ways. These extensions in a browser can grab information very quickly, and they can be used or they can be called a variety of different things, from social media platforms to new exciting technology, like all the AI things going on currently too as well. So this trend won't stop, whether it's current trends in the tech world. There's going to be connectors that are going to target individuals looking to extrapolate on those trends to add things to their browsers or to their machine that can get them access quicker. It's always going to be a lot quicker to get a user to install something, to connect something on a host, to then get the information they need, rather than trying to brute force their way into that host or into an environment. This goes even further too as well. If you have users who are maybe using personal devices, personal laptops, and they use a browser across those devices, even if they install those extensions or install those applications, maybe on a personal device and have those things sync to their work computer too as well, it can go either way. So now we're opening up more risk where we have personal devices syncing browser information extension to their work devices too as well. All these things connected, all more ability for these attackers to gain the information they need from a variety of browsers and a variety of systems too as well. Some things you can try to do to combat this also is only allow certain users to connect apps or only connect certain application types to your 365 tenant, where you're not allowing any user with the 365 address in your tenant to connect to whatever they want. This goes the same with browsers extensions too as well. If you have browsers that you use in the business environment, those should be controlled and locked down to only allow specific extensions or have an approval process where things are reviewed before they're added to a browser. You can also limit users from being able to sync that information to only approved devices also. So if you have someone using a browser that's connected to their account on a personal device, then if they add that extension, it doesn't sync back up to their work device also using that same browser and using that same profile. Additionally, because these browser extensions currently are reaching out to command and control IPs on a very regular basis, you can also make sure that if you have firewalls or other network appliances in place, that you have rules in place and you have alerts set up to where if any of these hosts are communicating with known command and control IPs, that you get alerted and that you know as quick as you can. If something does get through, then you can try to shut it down quicker rather than have the extension of the application running for quite some time before you realize what's going on before these things get pulled off the market.
So, SharePoint's got a 0-day that's already being exploited, so patch it. AI assistants are following instructions from people who aren't you. And Chrome extensions stay one of the easiest ways to steal a session and skip right past MFA. Boring stuff, important stuff. As always, thank you for watching. Please sound off in the comments with your questions or the stories you'd like us to cover next week. I'll be back next week with more updates for you. Until then, stay safe out there.